The rusty warship. Jack Carter stood in the middle of a massive junkyard, staring at the rusty old warship in front of him. It was ugly, covered in rust, dents, and scorch marks from old battles. The once powerful battle cruiser was now nothing more than a forgotten piece of metal, sold for scrap. The scrapyard dealer, a greasy old man named Griff, stood beside him, chewing on a toothpick. "She's a beauty, huh?" he said with a crooked smile. Jack scoffed. "She's a wreck." Griff laughed. "A wreck with a powerful past. This warship once belonged to the Titan fleet, fought in the Omega Wars. She might be broken now, but she's got secrets hidden inside." Jack didn't care about the past. He had only one reason for buying this ship. He was out of options. His days as a fighter pilot were long gone. No one wanted to hire a washed-up soldier with nothing but bad luck and unpaid debts. This warship was his last chance. If he could fix it up, he could start over, maybe become a freelancer, a smuggler, or even a bounty hunter. Jack sighed and tossed a small bag of credits to Griff. "It better fly." Griff grinned. "She'll fly, just not well." Jack climbed the rusty ramp and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old metal. The lights flickered, and the floor groaned under his boots. "Great," he muttered. "I just bought a flying coffin. Something feels wrong." Jack moved through the dark corridors, his boots echoing through the empty ship. He passed broken control panels, exposed wires, and shattered screens. The warship was dead inside, just like its past. As he entered the cockpit, he ran his hand over the control panel. Cold, lifeless. He pressed a few buttons, and the main screen flickered weakly. The ship's AI tried to boot up, but all Jack got was static and an error message. He sighed. "This is going to take a lot of work." Then he heard it. A sound. A soft, rustling noise. Jack froze. It came from somewhere inside the ship. He turned slowly, his hand reaching for his blaster. Silence. He waited. Nothing. Maybe it was just old machinery settling, he told himself, or maybe a loose cable shifting in the walls. Jack shook his head and continued checking the ship. But then he heard it again. A soft breath. His grip on his blaster tightened. "Who's there?" he called out. Silence. Jack took slow, careful steps down the hallway, following the sound. The air felt heavy, the ship suddenly colder. He reached the engine room. The door was slightly open. Jack nudged it with his boot. It creaked as it slid open. The engine room was dark, filled with shadows. Broken machinery lined the walls, and old power cables hung from the ceiling like dead vines. Then, in the dim light, Jack saw it. A small movement in the corner. His heart pounded. Jack raised his blaster. "Show yourself." No answer. Then something shifted behind an old crate. Jack stepped closer. And then a pair of glowing eyes stared back at him. Jack's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a rat. It was a girl. An alien girl, no older than 16, with silver hair and glowing violet eyes. She looked terrified. Jack lowered his blaster slightly. What the hell? The girl stared at him, frozen in fear. Her face was pale, thin, and covered in dust. Her clothes were torn, and she looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Jack took a cautious step forward. "Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you." The girl flinched and pressed herself against the wall, her breathing shaky. Jack's mind raced. Why was there a kid on his ship? How long had she been hiding here? And who was she running from? Before he could ask, the girl suddenly whispered something. Her voice was weak, barely a breath. But Jack heard it clearly. "They're coming." Jack's blood turned to ice. Before he could respond, the ship's alarm suddenly blared. A warning flashed across the flickering screen. "Incoming ship is DTECTD." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. The girl grabbed his arm with trembling fingers. Her eyes were wide with fear. "Please," she whispered. "You have to hide me." Jack's mind screamed with questions. Who was she? Who was after her? But he didn't have time to think. Because whoever they were, they had just found them. The hidden passenger. Jack Carter's mind raced as the alarm blared inside the ship. The flickering red light illuminated the small engine room, casting eerie shadows over the metal walls. His newly bought rusty warship had barely been his for an hour, and now something, or someone, was already coming for him. The alien girl still crouched in the corner, her glowing violet eyes wide with fear. She clutched her arms close to her chest, shaking. Jack narrowed his eyes. Who the hell was she? And why was she hiding on his ship? The ship's main system crackled to life, struggling against years of neglect. The AI voice, weak and distorted, barely functioned. Warning. 3 unidentified shades. APPROHAGing. Eastern ATD arrival. 90 CQNDs. Jack clenched his jaw. He didn't need this. He had just spent his last credits on this hunk of junk, hoping for a quiet job, maybe some smuggling or cargo runs. Instead, he was about to get blown out of the sky, all because of this mysterious stowaway. He turned back to the girl. "Start talking. Who's coming?" She hesitated, her thin hands gripping the edge of the crate she was hiding behind. She looked like she wanted to run, like she had been running for a long time. Jack's patience was running thin. He grabbed her wrist, not hard, but firm enough to keep her from bolting. "I don't have time for this, kid. Either you tell me what's going on, or I throw you out the airlock and deal with them myself." The girl flinched, but something in her eyes changed. She wasn't just scared, she was desperate. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're hunters." Jack frowned. "Bounty hunters." She shook her head quickly. "No. Worse. Incoming transmission. Enemy ships demanding surrender." Jack gritted his teeth and tapped the nearest console. Static filled the room for a second before a voice crackled through the speakers. "Unregistered vessel. This is Commander Vrax of the Dominion Strike Force." Jack's stomach twisted. The Dominion. The most brutal and merciless regime in the sector. "You are harboring a fugitive," the voice continued. "Surrender immediately, and you will be spared." Jack glanced at the girl. Her face had gone pale, her hands trembling. Jack sighed. Yeah, figures. The smart thing to do would be to turn her in. The ship was barely holding together. His weapons were dead, and his shields were non-existent. There was no way he could fight off 3 fully armed Dominion warships. But something about the way she looked at him, the pure fear in her glowing eyes, made him hesitate. Jack wasn't a hero. He had been a soldier once, a damn good one. But war had taught him one thing. Never trust anyone. Never stick your neck out for a stranger. Yet here he was, standing between this girl and death. Jack turned back to the console and hit the comm switch. "Hey, Vrax," he said, leaning against the panel. "I think you got the wrong guy. I just bought this ship an hour ago. Haven't even unpacked my bags yet." A pause. Then Vrax's voice came back, cold and sharp. "Do not play games, human. We have tracked the fugitive to your ship. You have 1 minute to comply." Jack sighed. Didn't think that would work. He turned back to the girl. "You better be worth this, kid." She swallowed hard. "Aye." But before she could say anything, Jack was already running. A desperate escape. Jack bolted for the cockpit, the girl scrambling after him. The warship was old, but it still had a few tricks left, and he was about to find out what they were. As soon as he slid into the pilot's seat, he flipped every switch he could find, forcing power into the ship's failing systems. The engines coughed and groaned, but they rumbled to life. 30 ECCONDS until in my engagement. Jack grabbed the flight controls and muttered, "Come on, girl, just give me one good jump." The ship lurched forward, metal creaking under the force. Jack had no idea if the hyperdrive even worked, but if it didn't, They were dead. The girl suddenly grabbed his arm. Jack flinched. What the? Her eyes glowed brighter, and for a brief second, the ship's control panel flashed with strange symbols. Jack's breath caught. That wasn't normal. Before he could question it, the ship's warning system screamed again. Missile located DTTTED. Too late. The Dominion warships had fired. Jack gritted his teeth. He slammed the hyperdrive activation switch. Nothing. The missile warnings grew louder. 5 seconds. Jack's mind raced. This was it. They were done. Then, the girl pressed her hands against the console, and a bright blue light surged through the ship. Jack barely had time to react before. Boom. The ship vanished into hyperspace. Silence. Jack gasped for breath. The ship was still in one piece. He looked over at the girl, who had slumped into the co-pilot's chair, her energy drained. Jack blinked at the glowing symbols still flickering on the screen. What the hell was that? He muttered. The girl looked at him, exhausted but relieved. I saved us, she said simply. Jack exhaled. Yeah, I noticed. Then he frowned. This girl wasn't just some random fugitive. She was something else entirely, and Jack had a feeling he was in way over his head. Into the unknown. The silence in the cockpit felt almost unnatural. Jack Carter sat in the pilot's seat, his hand still gripping the flight controls, his breath coming in short bursts. They should be dead. 1 second, Dominion missiles were locked onto them. The next, the ship had jumped to hyperspace, faster than anything Jack had ever seen. He turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing at the alien girl slumped in the co-pilot's seat. She looked drained, her silver hair damp with sweat, her glowing violet eyes dim and unfocused. Jack exhaled, forcing himself to speak. What the hell did you do? The girl blinked sluggishly. I saved us. Jack let out a dry laugh. Yeah, I caught that part. What I don't get is how. He glanced at the console, where strange glowing symbols still flickered. They weren't part of the ship's original programming. Jack knew that for sure. This old warship ran on Terran military code. Not whatever the hell this was. Jack leaned closer, tapping one of the symbols. It flared under his touch, sending a gentle pulse of energy through the console. The ship's engines hummed differently, almost as if the ship itself had felt it. Jack immediately yanked his hand back. Okay, that's new. He looked back at the girl, who was struggling to sit upright. She looked like she had just run a marathon without oxygen. You gonna tell me what that was? Jack asked. Because I don't like surprises. And that. He gestured to the console. That was a pretty damn big one. The girl took a slow breath. I connected with the ship. Jack raised an eyebrow. You did what? She met his eyes, her voice quiet but steady. The ship was dying. It had power, but it couldn't access it. I helped it. Jack stared at her. That's not how ships work. She simply shook her head. Not for you. But for me, it does. Jack leaned back in his seat, rubbing his temples. He was good at a lot of things. Flying, shooting, and staying alive. But magic, mind powers, ships that somehow responded to a person's touch. That was out of his league. And yet here he was. He exhaled, shaking his head. Great, just great. Where the hell are they? Jack turned his attention to the navigation screen, hoping for good news. He didn't get it. The display flickered with static before finally loading their coordinates. His stomach dropped. They weren't just far from Dominion space. They were nowhere. The map showed a region of space with no marked stations, no trade routes, and no inhabited planets. A dead zone. Jack frowned. That's not possible. A jump like that should have fried the ship's drive. The girl shifted uncomfortably. I pushed it further. Jack's grip tightened on the console. Pushed it how? I don't know how to explain it, she admitted. I just knew where we had to go. Jack stared at the screen. There was nothing here. Nothing but cold space and forgotten wrecks. He clenched his jaw. He hated not knowing. He hated being dragged into things he didn't understand. But most of all, he hated the feeling in his gut, the one telling him this wasn't over. Not even close. The ghost signal. Jack took a deep breath and started checking the ship's damage. The hull was intact, but the power core was unstable. Their hyperdrive shot to hell. They weren't going anywhere anytime soon. Jack was about to tell the girl that when something strange happened. A faint sound crackled through the speakers. At first, it was just static, broken, whispering noise. Then, slowly, a voice began to emerge. A distorted, broken message. Jack froze. The girl looked up, her expression suddenly alert. The voice was faint, but growing stronger. If anyone out there, please respond. Emergency. Jack quickly pulled up the comms panel. The transmission was coming from deep space, but there were no ships, no stations, nothing nearby. Just the signal. Someone's alive out here, Jack muttered. The girl's face darkened. Or something wants us to think they are. Jack hesitated. She had a point. But he also knew one thing for certain. Nothing good ever came from ghost signals in deep space. And yet, he couldn't ignore it. Jack switched on the comms mic. "This is Captain Jack Carter. Who am I speaking to?" For a moment, there was silence. Then the voice came through clearer than before. And this time, it sent a cold chill down Jack's spine. "You have something that belongs to us." Jack's heart stopped. He turned to the girl. Her face had gone completely pale. She knew that voice. Jack clenched his jaw. "Yeah," he muttered. "That's what I was afraid of." The hunters had found them. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. The ghost of war. The message crackled through the cockpit speakers, sending a cold shiver down Jack Carter's spine. "You have something that belongs to us." The voice was low and distorted, filled with static and menace. Jack didn't move. He barely breathed. Across from him, the alien girl was frozen, her face pale, her glowing violet eyes wide with fear. She knew that voice. Jack could see it in the way her hands clenched into fists, in the way she seemed to shrink in her seat. Jack wasn't the kind of guy who liked guessing games. But he didn't need a genius mind to figure it out. Whoever was on the other end of that signal was here for her. A cold-blooded warning. Jack reached out and muted the comms for a second. He turned to the girl. "All right, kid. Start talking." She looked at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Jack leaned in, his voice low but sharp. "Who the hell was that?" She swallowed hard. I don't know." Jack's jaw tightened. "Wrong answer." She hesitated. Then, finally, she whispered, "The Dominion has hunters." Jack's stomach sank. Hunters. That wasn't a term used lightly. The Dominion Strike Force had an elite unit, special operatives, assassins, and trackers who never failed to complete a mission. And this girl had one of them coming for her. Jack rubbed his temples. Perfect. Just perfect. He turned the comms back on. The signal was still there, waiting, watching. Jack took a breath. Time to bluff. "Listen," he said casually. "I think you got the wrong guy. I don't have anything of yours." A long silence. Then, a slow, distorted chuckle. "Captain Carter," the voice said smoothly, "do not waste my time." Jack's blood ran cold. They knew his name. Jack shot a glare at the girl. "What did you drag me into?" She shook her head quickly. "I swear, I didn't." The voice interrupted. "The girl is ours. Give her up, and I will let you live." Jack hated threats. He had spent too many years in war listening to men like this. Cold, arrogant killers who thought they were untouchable. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah. And what happens if I say no?" The voice didn't laugh this time. Instead, the ship's power suddenly flickered, and the cockpit lights dimmed. Jack cursed, spinning toward the controls. The ship was shutting down. The warship awakens. What the hell? Jack muttered, pressing buttons frantically. The screens glitched, flickering between static and strange symbols. The ship was no longer listening to him. Then, a deep mechanical growl rumbled through the warship. Jack's breath caught. The ship's AI had woken up. A voice, not from the hunters, but from deep within the ship itself, spoke for the first time. Unauthorized presence detected. Jack's pulse jumped. Oh, that's not good. The screens glowed bright red, and the ship's automated defense systems came online. Weapons priming, hull integrity scanning, target acquisition in progress. The warship was getting ready for battle. Jack turned to the girl. What did you do? She shook her head in shock. I don't know. The AI voice spoke again, cold and emotionless. Intruder detected, engaging countermeasures. Jack's stomach dropped. It wasn't talking about the hunters. It was talking about him. Hunted by his own ship. Jack barely had time to react before the cockpit sealed shut, trapping them inside. A hiss of gas filled the air. Jack coughed, his lungs burning. The AI was trying to knock him out. The girl gasped, gripping the console. The ship, it doesn't recognize you as its captain. Jack's mind raced. Of course, this wasn't just any warship. It was a Dominion warship, which meant it still thought he was an enemy. Jack struggled to stay upright, his vision blurring. His hands reached for the control panel, but the buttons locked him out. The girl suddenly pressed her hands against the screen, her eyes glowing brighter. A surge of blue light spread across the ship's systems. The gas stopped. The lights flickered. The AI's voice glitched, like it was confused. Then the ship spoke again. But this time, its voice was different. Princess, is that you? Jack's body went rigid. He turned to the girl slowly. Princess, he repeated. She lowered her head, guilt and exhaustion in her eyes. Jack's mind spun. He had been dragged into a war he didn't understand. And now he was sitting next to alien royalty. Before he could react, the hunter's signal returned. The cold voice spoke again. This is your last chance, Carter. Jack exhaled sharply. His ship was half broken. He had nowhere to run. And now he was protecting a fugitive princess from the most dangerous force in the galaxy. Jack grinned. Well, he muttered, guess we're doing this the hard way. He slammed his fist on the weapons control panel. The ship roared to life, turrets locking onto the incoming hunters. Jack cracked his knuckles and gripped the flight stick. All right, kid, he said. Time to see if this rust bucket can still fight. The girl nodded, her fear replaced with determination. Outside, the enemy ships closed in. The warship's guns began to glow. And in the darkness of space, the battle had begun. The warship's last fight. The cockpit trembled as the ship's automated weapons roared to life. The targeting systems flickered on the main display, locking onto the incoming Dominion hunters. Jack Carter's hands tightened around the flight controls. He had flown in 100 battles before. He had fought in the Omega Wars, dodged pirates in asteroid fields, and survived ambushes in deep space. But never, not once, had he fought in a ship that barely worked, while also being hunted by the deadliest operatives in the galaxy. The hunters close in. Through the viewport, Jack saw them. 3 sleek Dominion fighters, shaped like razor-sharp blades, weaving through space like predators closing in for the kill. Their weapons began charging, glowing red-hot. Jack let out a breath. He had seconds before they fired. He looked over at the alien girl, the princess, who was gripping the console, her violet eyes glowing faintly. Jack still didn't know her name. Didn't know why she had been hiding on his ship. Didn't know why she had somehow connected with the warship's eye. But none of that mattered right now. Because if they didn't fight back, they wouldn't live long enough to get answers. Jack flicked the manual override switch and slammed his foot on the thrusters. The ship lurched violently, engines sputtering as the rusty warship shot forward. Dodging death, the first hunter ship fired. A streak of red plasma tore through space. Jack barely rolled the ship aside in time. The energy blast scorched past, missing them by inches. The second and third hunters flanked from both sides, boxing him in. Jack gritted his teeth. "Come on, girl. Hold together." The warship's eye spoke, its voice robotic, but strangely alive. Power levels insufficient. Weapons at 47% capacity. Jack let out a curse. What about shields? Defensive shields offline. Perfect, Jack muttered. They were flying a dead ship against elite Dominion fighters. And yet, a part of him grinned. Because Jack Carter. He loved impossible odds. The princess awakens. Hold on, Jack barked. He jerked the flight stick to the side, sending the warship barrel rolling through enemy fire. The princess let out a small yelp, grabbing the edge of her seat. "Do you even have a plan?" she shouted. "Yeah," Jack called over the alarms. "Don't die." She shot him a glare. "That's not a plan." Jack grinned. "Worked for me so far." The princess shook her head and turned to the ship's control panel. Jack noticed her fingers glowing faintly again, just like before. The ship's AI stirred. "Princess, I am listening." Jack's eyes widened. "What the hell?" The princess closed her eyes and whispered something in a language Jack didn't understand. And suddenly, the ship changed. A sleeping giant wakes. The cockpit hummed with power. The once flickering screens sharpened, displaying hundreds of complex symbols and energy patterns. The ship's engines roared, stabilizing, running smoother than ever before. And then, the weapons systems fully engaged. Jack's HUD lit up, showing 2 hidden plasma cannons that had been offline since the war. Jack grinned. Well, he muttered. "Looks like we're not dead yet." The princess looked at him, breathless. The ship, it was never broken. It was just asleep. Jack nodded. "Then let's wake it up. Fight or die." The first hunter swooped in, coming from above, its laser cannons glowing hot. Jack didn't wait. He jerked the flight stick back and fired the newly activated cannons. The warship shook violently as a bright blue energy blast erupted from its side turrets, striking the first hunter dead center. Boom! The enemy fighter exploded in a burst of flame and debris. Jack let out a short laugh. "Yeah, now we're talking." But there was no time to celebrate. The second hunter ship looped behind them, firing rapidly. Alarms blared. The ship took a hit, metal plating ripping apart. Jack winced. One more direct hit, and they were done. Then, the princess touched the console again. The ship responded instantly. The rear thrusters suddenly flared, overloading the engine for a single burst of speed. Jack felt his stomach drop as the ship rocketed forward, dodging the incoming attack at the last second. The hunter missed its shot, leaving itself exposed. Jack didn't hesitate. He flipped the cannons and fired a second blast. Boom! The second Dominion fighter was gone. One left. The hunter's last mistake. The final hunter stayed at a distance, circling, studying. Jack narrowed his eyes. This one's smarter. The princess looked worried. It's waiting for something. Jack's stomach twisted. And then he saw it. A shadow in the distance. A shape too big to be a fighter. Jack's breath caught. No way. A nightmare returns. The darkness shifted. And then, the true danger revealed itself. A Dominion war cruiser. Massive. Armored. Armed to the teeth. And it was already locking onto them. Jack's blood ran cold. "We need to go," the princess said quickly. Jack clenched his jaw. "Kid, in case you forgot, our hyperdrive is busted." She pressed her hand against the console. I can fix that. Jack looked at her. You better. Because if you can't. The war cruiser fired its first shot. Jack barely pulled the ship aside in time as a massive red energy beam tore through the void, missing them by inches. The princess gritted her teeth, her entire body glowing. Jack's HUD flashed. HYPERDRIP slightly. TMs. On a line. Jack snapped his head toward her. You did it. She nodded weakly, sweat on her forehead. Not for long. Jump now. Jack didn't need to be told twice. He slammed the hyperdrive activation, and the ship vanished into hyperspace just as the war cruiser's second blast ripped through the spot they had been. The Dominion had missed them. For now. Escape. But for how long? Jack leaned back, exhaling hard. The ship wasn't in great shape, but they were alive. Barely. He turned to the princess. All right, he said, rubbing his face. Now you're gonna tell me everything. No more secrets. She nodded, exhausted. Jack's eyes narrowed. Because one thing was clear. This warship was no ordinary scrap metal. And this girl, she was worth dying for. Or worse, killing for. The truth revealed. The ship groaned as it drifted through hyperspace. Sparks still crackled from the damaged control panels, and smoke curled up from a burnt-out conduit near Jack's seat. But they were alive. Jack Carter let out a long breath, rubbing a hand down his face. His heart was still pounding from the battle. He had faced death before, but this was different. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He turned his head, his gaze falling on the alien girl slumped in the co-pilot's seat. Her silver hair clung to her forehead, damp with sweat. Her glowing violet eyes were half-lidded, exhausted. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. All right, kid, he said, his voice low but firm. Time to start talking. No more secrets. She didn't respond at first, just stare out at the swirling blue of hyperspace, her breathing uneven. Jack narrowed his eyes. I just risked my life. Hell, I just risked my ship to keep you out of Dominion hands. I think I deserve some answers. Still, she said nothing. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I don't even know your name. For a moment, silence. Then, Solara. Jack blinked. Solara. She nodded slowly. Jack leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. All right, Solara. Now, tell me why the Dominion sent an entire hunter squad after you. Solara's hands tightened in her lap. For the first time, Jack saw something in her face that wasn't just fear. It was pain. A princess in exile. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes. I wasn't always running, she murmured. I used to live in a palace. My father was a king. Jack's eyebrows lifted slightly. So you really are a princess. She gave a small, tired smile. Not anymore. Jack didn't press her. Not yet. He just let her talk. My people, we were known as the Verathi. Solara continued. We were a peaceful race. We didn't have the same advanced technology as the Dominion, but we had something else. Jack tilted his head. Let me guess. That weird power of yours. Solara nodded. We called it Sci-Fi, a connection to energy, to machines, to life itself. Jack frowned. You mean you could control technology? Not control, she corrected. Bond with it. Make it listen. Make it wake up. Jack thought back to the warship's AI suddenly responding to her voice. The way the ship had seemed to come alive the moment she touched the console. It wasn't magic. It was her. Jack exhaled. All right. So what happened to your people? Solara's fingers dug into her arms. The Dominion came. They saw our abilities as a threat. They invaded our homeworld, took our cities, killed my family. Jack's stomach tightened. She lifted her head, her violet eyes gleaming with unused tears. I'm the last one left. Jack sat in silence for a long moment. He had fought in wars. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had lost brothers, friends, entire colonies to the Dominion's iron grip. But this was genocide. Jack let out a slow breath. So the Dominion wants you dead. Silara swallowed. No, they want me alive. Jack frowned. Why? She hesitated, then finally whispered, because I know where the last Verithi weapon is hidden. The weapon that could end an empire. Jack's blood went cold. Come again. Silara glanced at the warship's controls, her fingers trembling. Before my people fell, the Royal Engineers built something. A ship. A warship unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Bigger than a Dominion dreadnought, Silara continued. Faster than any hyperdrive in existence, powered by Sci-Fi. Jack's mind raced. A ship that could bond with a pilot like Silara. That could think and react faster than any AI. That could adapt in real time. That wasn't just a ship. That was a goddamn superweapon. Jack exhaled sharply. And you know where it is? Silara nodded. Jack let out a humorless laugh. Well, now I see why the Dominion's after you. Silara looked down. I never wanted this war. But if the Dominion finds that ship first, they'll use it to control the entire galaxy. Jack leaned back, rubbing his jaw. This was way bigger than he had signed up for. He had thought he was just buying a rusty old warship. Instead, he had just walked into the middle of a war for the future of the galaxy. Jack sighed, shaking his head. I should have left you in that damn engine room. Silara flinched. Jack groaned and ran a hand through his hair. Relax, I'm joking. Mostly. Silara smiled slightly. Jack exhaled. So, where is this super weapon? Silara hesitated. Jack narrowed his eyes. Silara. She finally whispered. It's hidden inside a lost planet. A place no one can reach, except me. Jack raised an eyebrow. And how do you know where it is? Silara placed a hand over her heart. Jack blinked. Oh, he muttered. You don't just know where it is. You're linked to it. She nodded. Jack let out a slow, low whistle. Well, kid, that's just great. Silara sighed. I never asked for this. Jack chuckled dryly. Yeah, neither did I. The final message. Before Jack could say anything else, the ship's radar console flickered. Silara snapped her head up. What is that? Jack frowned, leaning over the control panel. A new signal had appeared. A beacon. A distress message, weak and old, broadcasting on an ancient Verithi frequency. Silara's breath caught. That's impossible. Jack tapped the screen. It's coming from deep space. Silara stared at the blinking signal. Her voice was barely a whisper. It's coming from the lost planet. Jack slowly exhaled. Looks like their next stop was hell itself. The journey to the lost planet. The warship drifted through hyperspace, its battered hull humming with a faint pulse of energy keeping it together. The battle was over, but Jack Carter knew one thing for certain. They weren't safe. Not even close. Jack sat in the pilot's seat, eyes locked on the console. The distress beacon blinked steadily, sending a signal across space, weak, hold, and barely functioning. A ghost signal, calling out from a place no one should be able to reach. Silara sat beside him, her violet eyes locked on the screen. Her breathing was steady, but Jack could tell she was nervous. And she had every right to be. Jack tapped the console. All right, princess. One more time. Explain this lost planet to me. Silara took a breath. It's called Valkyr. It was our final sanctuary. Before the Dominion wiped out my people, the last of our engineers hid the warship there. Jack nodded slowly. And let me guess, it's hidden in some death trap of a star system, right? Silara hesitated, then nodded. Jack sighed. Of course it is. The door that shouldn't exist. As the ship hurtled through hyperspace, Jack checked the navigational star charts. The coordinates given by the distress beacon made no sense. There was nothing there. No planets, no moons, just dead space. Jack frowned. If this place is real, why hasn't anyone found it? Silara hesitated. Because it's not really in this dimension. Jack slowly turned to her. Excuse me. She placed a hand on the console, her fingers tracing the flickering symbols. Valkyr exists, but not in normal space. My people use Sci-Fi's energy to create a rift, a tear in reality. It's like a hidden door. If you don't know how to open it, you'll never find the planet. Jack exhaled sharply. Great, so we're looking for a door to nowhere. Silara nodded. Jack let out a dry laugh. I should have stayed on Mars. The storm between worlds. The ship shuddered, and the starry tunnel of hyperspace flickered. Jack's hands tightened on the controls. What the hell? The engines groaned, and suddenly, the ship lurched forward, speeding up on its own. Silara's eyes widened. We're being pulled in. Jack cursed, slamming his fists on the controls. Nothing responded. The ship was caught in something beyond his control, beyond even normal physics. Outside the viewport, space itself seemed to bend and twist, as if folding in on itself. Jack had seen a lot of weird things in his lifetime, but never this. Arrival at the end of the universe. Then, everything went dark. The ship stopped moving. The engine shut down. Jack's breath hitched as he looked out the viewport. They were floating in an empty void. No stars, no planets, no light, just endless blackness. Jack swallowed. This is the worst vacation I've ever had. Silara ignored him, pressing her hands against the control panel. Her eyes glowed softly, and then a faint shimmer appeared in the darkness. Jack leaned forward. What is that? A shape emerged from the void. Massive, ancient, pulsing with blue light. It was a planet-sized structure, floating alone in the abyss. And at its center, a ship. Jack's heart pounded, because this wasn't just any warship. This was the Varathi superweapon. It was alive. The last warship of the Varathi. Silara whispered, It's waiting for me. Jack exhaled. Yeah, well, let's hope it's in a good mood. He guided the ship closer, passing through the swirling blue light surrounding the monolithic structure. As they approached, the warship responded. The hull began to shift, ancient symbols lighting up along its surface. Jack felt the energy pulsing through the air. It wasn't just technology. It was something more. Silara closed her eyes, and the warship's voice spoke for the first time in centuries. Welcome home, Princess Silara. Jack shivered. This ship wasn't just a machine. It was something far older and far more dangerous. The final battle begins. Before Jack could react, the warship's alarms blared. Incoming ship is DETCTED. Jack's stomach dropped. Tell me that's a glitch. Silara turned pale. They found us. Jack spun the viewport, and his blood turned to ice. A Dominion fleet was emerging from the void. Destroyers, cruisers, a dreadnought-class flagship. Jack let out a slow, steady breath. They had minutes before the Dominion rained hell down on them. He turned to Silara. Can you activate the warship? She nodded. I have to bond with it. It'll take time. Jack cracked his knuckles. Then I'll buy you time. Silara hesitated. Jack, you can't fight a whole fleet alone. Jack grinned. I can sure as hell try. He turned back to the pilot's seat, releasing the warship's external weapons. The old battle cruiser rumbled, its cannons glowing to life. The Dominion was coming. And Jack Carter, he was ready for them.